You are standing in a circle of warriors. It's dawn, cold enough that your breath fogs in front of your face, and the man next to you has just stripped off his shirt in freezing weather like it's nothing. His eyes are dilated so wide they look almost entirely black. He's foaming slightly at the corners of his mouth, and he's biting his own shield. Not out of fear, out of something that looks a lot more like joy. In a few minutes, this man is going to run at an enemy line without armor, without hesitation, and without any apparent concept of pain. And the terrifying part is, he's not insane, he's medicated. Ancient history is full of drugs. We've covered plenty of them on this channel. The fun ones, the sacred ones, the ones that built entire religions. But today we're doing something different. Today we're ranking the worst. Not worst as in least fun. Worst as in the substances that were most likely to kill you, disfigure you, or turn you into someone your own family didn't recognize. And the answer isn't as simple as you'd think, because the deadliest drug in the ancient world wasn't always the one that felt the most dangerous while you were taking it. Sometimes the drugs that felt the best were exactly the ones quietly killing you the slowest. Let's get into it. Let's start with the guy from that cold open, because he's not fictional. He's describing a documented phenomenon from Viking-age Scandinavia, roughly the 9th century AD. The berserkers, warriors so ferocious that their name literally became the root of the modern English word berserk, were said to fight in a trance-like fury, immune to pain, biting their shields, howling like animals, and charging into battle essentially naked while sane men wore full armor. For a long time, historians treated this as pure legend, poetic exaggeration in the Old Norse sagas. Then researchers started looking more seriously at a plant called henbane. Henbane, scientifically Hyoskiamos niger, is what's known as a deliriant. This is an important distinction, and it's going to come up again in this video, so hold on to it. A hallucinogen distorts your perception of reality. You know something's off, you're just seeing colors that aren't there, or objects breathing that shouldn't be. A deliriant replaces reality entirely. You cannot tell the difference between what's happening and what your brain is inventing. Henbane contains tropane alkaloids, specifically hyoscyamine and scopolamine, which in the right dose produce exactly the kind of behavior the sagas describe. Uncontrollable aggression, complete immunity to pain signals, and an unshakable, full-body conviction that you are physically invincible. Archaeologists have actually found henbane seeds at Viking burial sites and settlement locations, which suggests it wasn't just available, it was being deliberately used. Norse shamans, called vulvas, reportedly burned the seeds and inhaled the smoke to enter trance states. Here's the part that makes henbane genuinely dangerous, rather than just interesting. The line between a warrior who feels invincible and a warrior who is actually harmed is razor thin, because the drug doesn't just block pain, it blocks the warning system pain exists to provide. Men on henbane reportedly kept fighting after injuries that should have stopped them immediately, which meant they bled out faster, went into shock without noticing, and in several accounts, simply dropped dead mid-battle from what modern doctors would probably diagnose as untreated hemorrhage, combined with cardiac stress from the alkaloids themselves. You weren't just risking death from the enemy. You were risking death from your own nervous system lying to you about how injured you actually were. And henbane wasn't just a battlefield drug. This is where it gets stranger. One of the documented side effects of tropane alkaloid deliriants is a powerful sensation of flying. Users across multiple documented cultures reported the specific feeling of leaving the ground, rising, soaring. Medieval European accounts of witches describe them applying an ointment to their skin, often with the assistance of a stick or staff, and then experiencing flight. Historians now widely believe this ointment contained henbane or related plants like belladonna and mandrake, absorbed through the skin, and that the staff, applied to sensitive membrane tissue for faster absorption, is the actual origin of the flying broomstick myth. Which means one of the most enduring images in Western folklore, a witch on a broom, may be a folk memory of women self-administering a genuinely dangerous deliriant drug, and then reporting hallucinated flight so consistently that it became cultural mythology. So henbane earns its spot on this list for a very specific reason. It doesn't just alter your mind. It actively lies to your body about what state it's in, and that lie can be fatal even when the drug itself doesn't directly poison you. Now let's talk about something significantly more insidious, because unlike henbane, which required someone to deliberately seek it out and use it, this next one could get you completely by accident, through something as mundane as your dinner. Ergot. Ergot is a fungus, Claviceps purpurea, that grows on grain, especially rye, in cool, damp growing seasons. Left untreated, it produces small dark purplish growths called sclerotia that replace individual grain kernels. Grind that grain into flour without noticing, bake it into bread, and you've just served your entire household a dose of some of the most potent natural alkaloids known to exist. The chemical family involved includes lysergic acid, which, decades later, a chemist named Albert Hofmann would use as the starting material to synthesize LSD. Ergot is, in the most literal sense, natural acid baked directly into a loaf of bread. But here's what separates ergot from almost everything else on this list. Depending on dose, ergot doesn't just get you high. It has two entirely different modes of poisoning, and both of them are horrifying in completely different ways. The first is called convulsive ergotism, which produces violent seizures, muscle spasms, and terrifying hallucinations. The second is gangrenous ergotism, where the alkaloids cause blood vessels to constrict so severely that circulation to the extremities cuts off entirely. Fingers, toes, sometimes entire limbs would blacken, die, and in documented medieval cases, spontaneously detach from the body. This condition had a name in medieval Europe: St. Anthony's fire. Because sufferers described a burning sensation in their limbs so intense, it felt like they were being cooked alive from the inside, and monks of the Order of St. Anthony became known for treating victims. Now here's where ergot might have quietly shaped Western civilization in a way most people have never heard. In ancient Greece, the most important religious ceremony for nearly 2,000 years was something called the Eleusinian Mysteries, a secret initiation ritual held annually near Athens that reportedly produced life-altering mystical experiences in its participants. Attendees drank a beverage called kykeon, made from barley, water, and mint. Barley, as we just established, is exactly the kind of grain that ergot loves to contaminate. In 1978, the chemist Albert Hofmann, the same man who synthesized LSD, co-authored a book with the ethnobotanist Gordon Wasson and classicist Karl Ruck, arguing that the priests at Eleusis had figured out how to extract the psychoactive compounds from ergot while filtering out the compounds that cause convulsions and gangrene, essentially engineering a controlled psychedelic sacrament. The list of people who participated in these mysteries includes Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. If the theory holds, some of the literal founders of Western philosophy may have shaped their ideas about reality and consciousness while under the influence of what was functionally ancient LSD, deliberately refined by priests who understood dosage well enough to give people visions instead of gangrene. Then, about 2,000 years later, ergot may have done the opposite. In 1976, a behavioral psychologist named Linda Caporal proposed that the Salem witch trials of 1692 were caused not by demonic possession, but by ergot poisoning. The rye crop in Salem that particular year had grown in unusually warm, damp conditions, ideal for fungal contamination. The symptoms recorded in the actual trial documents: convulsions, hallucinations, the specific sensation of being pricked by invisible pins, crawling sensations under the skin, line up disturbingly well with the clinical symptoms of convulsive ergotism. Not every historian accepts this theory, and there are reasonable counterarguments, but the possibility remains genuinely unsettling. The same fungus may have inspired the philosophical foundations of Western thought at Eleusis and, roughly 2,000 years later, gotten 20 innocent people executed in colonial Massachusetts. One organism, growing quietly on grain, capable of enlightenment or execution depending entirely on who controlled the dose. Ergot earns its place here specifically because it's invisible until it isn't. Henbane, you had to seek out. Ergot could show up in your bread without your knowledge, and depending on how much you'd unknowingly eaten that week, you could end up either seeing God or losing your fingers. Let's move to something that operated in the exact opposite direction. Instead of hiding in your food, this next substance hid in plain sight, respected, prescribed, and administered by physicians who genuinely believed they were helping: mercury. Ancient and medieval medicine had an enduring, catastrophic love affair with mercury, and it lasted for an almost unbelievable span of human history, roughly 2,000 years across multiple completely unconnected civilizations. Ancient Chinese alchemists, working as early as the 3rd century BC, believed mercury was a key ingredient in elixirs of immortality. The irony here borders on tragic. China's own first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified China and built the Terracotta Army, reportedly died from mercury poisoning after consuming pills specifically formulated by his court alchemists to make him live forever. He was searching so intensely for eternal life that he ingested the exact substance that ended his life early, and accelerated cognitive decline and paranoid behavior documented in his final years may have been symptoms of the cognitive. Chronic mercury exposure itself. Ancient Roman and Greek physicians used mercury compounds topically and internally for skin conditions, and later, medieval European doctors would use it as a treatment for syphilis for literally hundreds of years, giving rise to the grim medical saying that a night with Venus led to a lifetime with mercury. The treatment often produced worse damage than the disease it claimed to cure. Mercury poisoning causes tremors, so severe and characteristic that the phrase "mad as a hatter" originates from a related but separate industrial exposure centuries later, along with tooth loss, kidney failure, cognitive decline, and profound personality changes including paranoia and irritability. What makes mercury uniquely dangerous compared to henbane or ergot is duration and trust. Hanbane, you took once for a specific ritual or battle. Ergot contamination was usually seasonal and eventually got identified and removed from a community's grain supply. Mercury was administered repeatedly, over months or years, by trusted medical authorities, to patients who believed they were being healed. The people poisoning themselves weren't reckless warriors or unlucky peasants eating bad bread. They were sick people doing exactly what they were told to do by the most educated men of their era. And the treatment itself was the thing killing them slowly enough that nobody connected the dots for 2,000 years. Now we arrive at the substance that might be the single most efficient killer on this entire list. Precisely because it required no elaborate ritual, no accidental contamination, and no centuries of medical misunderstanding. Just knowledge of a specific plant and the willingness to use it. Hemlock. Conium maculatum, poison hemlock, contains an alkaloid called coneine that causes a very specific and very well understood form of death. It's a neurotoxin that produces ascending paralysis, meaning the paralysis starts in your feet and legs and climbs steadily upward through your body while you remain completely conscious the entire time, fully aware of what's happening, until it reaches your diaphragm and you suffocate because your own lungs have stopped receiving the signal to breathe. There is no dramatic convulsion, no hallucination, no sense of euphoria to soften the experience, just a slow, clear-headed, rising numbness that ends in asphyxiation. This is the drug that killed Socrates. In 399 BC, after being convicted by an Athenian court of corrupting the youth in impiety, Socrates was sentenced to execute himself by drinking a hemlock preparation. Plato's account in the Phaedo describes his death in specific, almost clinical detail, the numbness spreading upward from his feet, his continued lucidity, and even conversation with his students as the paralysis climbed his body, right up until it reached his chest. It's one of the most famous deaths in recorded history, and it's essentially a first-hand description of exactly how a neurotoxin dismantles the human nervous system in real time, written by someone who was in the room watching it happen. Hemlock earns its spot on this list for a reason completely different from everything else. Henbane made you feel invincible while quietly getting you killed. Ergot could poison you completely without your knowledge, hidden in your dinner. Mercury poisoned you slowly while everyone involved believed it was medicine. Hemlock did none of that. It was fast, deliberate, and it worked exactly as intended, which in its own way might be the most disturbing entry on this entire list. Sometimes the deadliest ancient substance wasn't the one that tricked you. It was simply the one that did precisely what everyone already knew it would do and got handed to people anyway. So which one was actually the worst? It depends entirely on what you're measuring. If you're measuring speed and certainty, hemlock wins. No ambiguity, no survivors, no gray area. If you're measuring how badly a substance could betray your own body's warning systems, henbane takes it, turning pain immunity into a death sentence nobody saw coming until it was too late. If you were measuring pure unpredictability, the sheer terror of not knowing whether your dinner might grant you a religious epiphany or turn your fingers black and cause them to fall off, ergot is in a category of its own. And if you're measuring which drug killed the most people over the longest span of time while being actively administered by people who thought they were helping, mercury might be the most quietly devastating of them all. A slow poison wearing the mask of medicine for 2,000 uninterrupted years. What ties all four of these together isn't really the chemistry. It's what they reveal about ancient people themselves. They weren't ignorant. They were experimenting constantly, out of necessity, with almost no way to separate a genuinely effective treatment from a genuinely lethal mistake except trial, error, and an appalling body count. Every plant, every fungus, every metal got tested the hard way, on real people, in real time, with the only feedback mechanism being whether or not that person was still breathing the next morning. Some of what they learned gave us modern pharmacology. Some of what they learned gave us folklore about flying witches and philosophers who accidentally tripped on ancient LSD at a religious festival. And some of it just quietly killed people for 2,000 years before anyone thought to ask why. The line between medicine and poison in the ancient world wasn't a line at all. It was a dosage, a season's rainfall, a trusted physician's mistaken confidence, or a jury verdict in an Athenian courtroom. And the substances that crossed it left behind either philosophy, mythology, or a body count, sometimes all three from the exact same plant.